we have with us John Hagel, and you can actually see the power of his pull by the fact that Tatiana had it sold out. She had it sold out with some more, and then she had it sold out with still more people. And so you see this giant group of us here tonight. Quite exciting. Formally, John is the co-founder and co-chair of Dilbert's Center for the Edge with John Seeley Brown. He has been a startup manager. He has been a tech company leader. My fun fact was the Atari connection. That one made me smile and continues to make me smile. He's also been global practice leader for McKinsey's electronic commerce and strategy practices. A few of his books, and I'd like to hear more about the one you wrote in law school. That was kind of a shocker. A few of his books are The Only Sustainable Edge, Net Gain, and I know someone has a copy of Net Gain here tonight, and Out of the Box. Numerous awards, including being a fellow of the World Economic Forum. But more importantly for us here tonight, he's an expert in our shifting world. And when I think about the shifting of this world, it's from push to pull, which I'm sure we're going to get to hear about, from knowledge transfer to knowledge creation, and from transactions to relationships. Right? And the thing about John is that he actually participates in the fullness of all of this. Tonight, we're seeing it. He's here with us. He's actually here with us because of a cold call Facebook message I sent. And maybe I mentioned the beer. You know, maybe that was it. But he participates in this. He and John Seeley Brown have hosted over 600 people in face-to-face interactions like this one, where the focus has been on the relationships and the knowledge creation, not so much the sage on the stage. And, you know, I guess what I'm hoping for tonight is advice on how to take advantage. I think we can do this first part. We know how to make the connections and the relationships. We're already having some great discussions. And I'd like to know what our next step might be. So with that, I give you John Hagel.
Thank you. I've been told that by the rules of this forum, I have exactly 18 minutes to give you the summary of the book, so it's a big challenge. I thought what I would do because of that is just focus on some key provocative propositions and hopefully tease you enough so that you'll actually read the book as opposed to just view this as sufficient. So I'm going to go through 6 provocative propositions. I have 3 minutes each for each of them, so I can only give you the high level, and hopefully in Q&A we can develop them further. The first proposition that's developed in the book is the notion that our management practices and institutions are fundamentally broken. And that's a pretty bald statement, and it requires a lot of support. And in the book, there is support. The one piece of evidence I will give to support that proposition now is based on some research work that we did that we called the Shift Index, which was an attempt to look at long-term trends in the economy. And it ended up with 25 metrics. But one metric that caught most people's attention was a simple question of how have companies done over a long period of time in the United States. And so we ended up going back to 1965 and looking at profitability. We looked at return on assets from 1965 to today for all U.S. public companies, not a sample, but every single public company was in our database. Over that time period, return on assets has basically collapsed. It's declined by 75%. It's been a long-term, sustained erosion in profitability. There is absolutely no sign of it leveling off, much less turning around. And so it really calls into question our ability to really continually deliver economic value to the marketplace. It certainly puts into context all the headlines we read on a daily basis of the economic cycle, and are we in a recovery? Is it going to be a steep recovery? Is there going to be a double dip? Those are obviously really interesting and important questions, but they pale into insignificance relative to a 40-plus year trend of sustained erosion in profitability. Who's paying attention to that? What is the cause of that? What is the answer to that? What are we going to do about that? Nobody's talking about that. So that's the first proposition, is the management practices and institutions are fundamentally broken. The second proposition is that while some of the explanation for that has to do with intensifying competition, we believe that's only part of the answer. That the real answer has to do with not only is competition intensifying, but it's shifting in a fundamental way. And the way we capture this at a high level is the notion that economic value is moving from knowledge stocks to knowledge flows. And the basic proposition here is, if you think about the key to success for U.S. companies for over a century, it's been about the notion of developing a proprietary set of knowledge, aggressively protecting that knowledge from anybody else getting access to it, and then efficiently extracting the value of that knowledge to deliver it to the shareholders. The problem with that model, although it created enormous success, huge corporations, very profitable companies, the problem with that in a world that's more rapidly changing is knowledge stocks are depreciating at an accelerating rate. What we know today is becoming less and less relevant faster and faster over time. So the question is, what's the alternative? The alternative that we propose in the book is that it's about participating more effectively in knowledge flows. So that rather than just focusing on protecting what you know today, it's who do you connect with, how do you connect with them, so that you can learn faster and develop more value on a more rapid basis, improve your performance more rapidly. Increasingly in corporate boardrooms, when I'd sit down with senior executives, I hear the metaphor of the Red Queen. And everybody talks about the Red Queen running faster and faster to stay in the same place. In fact, that's an optimistic view of our situation. She ran faster and faster and stayed in the same place. We're running faster and faster and falling farther and farther behind. So that's a severe situation. So the third proposition, now I start to shift a bit, is so what's the answer? And in part, at a high level, the answer is innovation. But I will make the proposition that the global center of innovation is shifting from the United States to India and China. And that typically, when I talk to U.S. executives, confront enormous amazement and puzzlement as to why I could even make such a claim. I think part of the explanation for why I make that claim is that U.S. executives tend to, when they talk about innovation, almost inevitably focus on product and technology innovation. It's all about coming up with the newest generation of technology, the newest product set, and if it's not breakthrough, don't even bother me about it. I want breakthrough product and technology innovation. We would argue that in this kind of changing world, where the challenge is to move from knowledge stocks to knowledge flows, the most important and most powerful kind of innovation is a different form. It's an institutional innovation. It's rethinking at a basic level what's the role of corporations in our institutions, and how do we block out the train noise, and what are the relationships that need to be created across institutions to generate more of these knowledge flows, more scalable knowledge flows. And if you think about it in those terms, we would make the case, and I run a research center where we've had research teams over in China and India exploring some of the entrepreneurial companies that are merging there. We would make the case that there are companies in China and India that are developing scalable business networks in a way that any Western company would find impossible to match. And yet that's getting no attention here in the United States because we just focus on product and technology innovation. This other kind of innovation is invisible innovation. They're not even looking for it, so they don't see it. And yet we believe that's fundamental to our success. So far, I've given you three propositions. The notion that things are broken, that the basis of competition is changing, and that there's a different kind of innovation which is shifting from the United States to other parts of the world. So far, it's a doom and gloom picture. We're in Silicon Valley. We are congenital optimists, so inevitably I have to shift to the optimistic side. And the last three propositions are more of the optimist side. It has to do with what's the upside here. If we can figure out how to move from knowledge stocks to knowledge flows and do the institutional innovation, what's the reward? And I would suggest that the reward here is that for the first time, we think in history, we have the opportunity to move from, many of you may be familiar with, BCG has a very famous chart that they built their whole firm around called the experience curve. And it's a very powerful and accurate description of how performance improves in markets and industries. They first came up with this, and I speak from some experience since I was at BCG in the early days. They started this by looking at the semiconductor industry, and they found that when they looked at performance in the semiconductor industry, it had this experience curve effect. And then they started applying it to all other kinds of industries. They ended up looking at things like the Japanese beer industry, the toilet paper industry. All of these industries have the same kind of curve. The slope shifts a bit, but it's the same basic curve. The problem with the curve is it's a diminishing returns curve. The more experience you accumulate in a market or industry, the longer you have to wait for that next increment of performance improvement. I would suggest that that's part of the stress we're all experiencing today in business after business, is that we're in a diminishing returns world. We're working harder and harder to get that next increment, and that generates a lot of stress. In contrast, if you figure out how to participate in knowledge flows and scalable knowledge flows, we believe there's an opportunity for the first time to turn that experience curve on its side and create an increasing returns curve, where the more people that participate, the faster everybody learns and the faster performance improves. Now, admittedly, this is probably the most speculative part of the book. We had to look pretty far afield to find evidence of this kind of increasing returns curve. But we spent a lot of time looking at extreme sports as an example where you see this kind of increasing returns. We ended up looking at big wave surfing as a test bed of this. We ended up back to my Atari days in the online gaming world and looked at World of Warcraft. And if you look at World of Warcraft, you see this kind of exponential performance improvement. We looked at certain areas of the software industry, particularly a software developer network that's emerged around SAP, and you see similar kinds of trends. And we've ended up figuring out what are the common elements that exist across those environments and how could we harness that in a more classic business world. To be really provocative on this side, I've actually gone to several business school campuses, including Berkeley across the Bay and Harvard Business School, and made the following proposition, which is that if you are a student and wanting to learn about management, don't go to business school. Go to World of Warcraft, sign up for World of Warcraft, and you'll get a much better management education than you ever would at business school. Now, that's a very provocative proposition. I'll support it with one story. Story does not equal data, but it's an interesting story. 10 years ago, I did a startup up in San Francisco. There was a guy who joined our startup. He was just out of college, and he was basically your computer help desk person. He was the guy you went to if your computer was down, and he would fix it. He was a total geek and loved his job and was great at it. 8 years later, he was named the CIO of Starbucks, the youngest CIO of any Fortune 500 company in 8 years out of college. And if you ask him the key to his rapid rise over those 8 years, he will say it's because he was a guild leader in World of Warcraft. And then he did learn a set of management techniques in World of Warcraft that were essential for his rapid success, rapid rise, and performance improvement in the business world. So that's something we can talk about further if you want. So I'm now up to the fifth provocative proposition, which is that if we're going to get to that increasing returns performance curve, we need to solve something that we've called the Dilbert paradox. in the book. And the Dilbert paradox has to do with the following. If you go to any CEO or senior executive and ask them what their most important priorities are, almost inevitably they will say talent is one of their top priorities, if not their top priority. And yet the Dilbert paradox says, okay, if you take that at face value, then how do you explain the enormous popularity of these cultural items like Dilbert or The Office, which so graphically demonstrate the stultifying effect of our work environment on talent? There's a paradox there. How do you reconcile it? A short form answer would be that the part of the reconciliation has to do with, ask the executive the next level question is, okay, talent's your most important priority, what are you doing about it? And most executives will answer, well, we're doing two things. We're focusing on attracting world-class talent. We recruit at the best business schools. We go out to the best companies and try to poach the best people. And then secondly, we focus very heavily on retaining that talent. If there is any evidence of dissatisfaction that they might leave, we are masters of putting together packages that will hold on to those people. Golden handcuffs work wonders. There's a missing middle in there, which is talent development. If you just focus on attracting and retaining talent, you don't pay a lot of attention to talent development. We would argue that if you really focused on talent development, you would attract all the talent you could possibly handle, because word would spread that you develop talent better than anybody else. And secondly, you would retain that talent, because if you are developing their talent better than anybody else, why would they ever leave? Why would they ever go anywhere else? It'd be foolish. Now, when I talk to most executives about this, they will say, okay, talent development, I got it. What training programs are you talking about? Who should go at what point in their career? And what's the curriculum? And our proposition there is actually training programs are becoming less and less relevant. That it's not about training programs. It's about constructing, designing the work environment so that you maximize talent development on the job on a day-to-day basis. And that if you look at our work environments today, they are not designed for talent development. They're designed for efficiency of operations and predictability, and that's a completely different objective. So if you were really serious about talent development and were really focused on the job talent development, we would argue you would rethink all aspects of operations, rethink all aspects of your organization, and even your business strategies, and certainly your IT platforms. That's largely off the charts for most executives today. So if I haven't upset enough people, I'll go to the final proposition, which is the notion that if we're going to solve the Dilbert paradox and get to this notion of increasing returns to performance, there's another thing that we all are going to have to do as individuals, and that is that we're going to have to increasingly integrate our passion with our profession. Most of us were brought up to believe that you went to work to get a paycheck so that you could pursue your passion after work. Whether it's a hobby, a sport, family, whatever, just don't bring your passion into work. That's very disruptive. It's not conducive to predictability. We argue that that's going to be less and less tenable, that if you are not passionate about the work you're doing, you're going to be under increasing stress, you are ultimately going to burn out or be marginalized and simply fall by the wayside. The world is increasing in pressure. We believe that part of this long-term change that we're going through is increasing pressure. We don't think that's going to go away. And so finding ways to combine passion and profession are going to be central to all of us. Two quick pieces of observation about this. Why do we say passion is so important in a business context? One thing is what we call the questing disposition, and it has to do with the notion of how do workers respond to unexpected challenges. Something happens that they didn't expect that really challenges them. If they don't have passion about their work, their response is largely, first of all, to try to avoid it, try to ignore it, and see if it'll go away. Sometimes that works. More often it doesn't go away. So then you try to paper it over and just hide it. And if you can't hide it, you try to do some kind of kludge. But the key objective is to get back to your assigned work as quickly as possible. This challenge is a distraction, it's a headache, it's something you don't want to engage on. If you're really passionate about your work, you have a completely different kind of mindset. You look at that challenge and you say, wow, that's really interesting. How would I handle that? This is challenging me to go beyond what I've experienced. How could I do that? And who would I reach out to try to figure this out? And by the way, if you're really passionate about your work, you don't wait for the challenges to come to you. You go out and seek the challenges. You're constantly wanting to test yourself and move to that next level of performance. So in a world that's demanding more and more performance, if you don't have that kind of questing disposition, you are going to be under increasing stress and burnout. And then the final piece of evidence around passion is part of the shift index we looked at was the relationship between passion and connection. And we looked at connection on multiple levels. So it has everything to do from how often you go to conferences that are related to your profession, how much do you participate in social media related to your profession, how much do you actually, just at a simple level, go out to lunch with somebody that's outside your company but related to your work. The people who say they're passionate about their work are actually twice as connected as people who are not passionate. Stands to reason. I mean, if you're passionate about your work, you're constantly seeking out other people who share your passion or who can be helpful to you in improving your own performance in your area of passion. So that's an interesting observation. Now, the problematic piece of this is that we actually went out and did a survey to try to test levels of passion in the workforce. In the United States today, last year actually, when the survey was done, 20% of our workforce are passionate, 80% are not. And the level of passion is inversely related to the size of the company. It's the facts. All I do is report the facts. The larger the institution, the lower the level of passion. The most passionate people are the self-employed people who are working on their own. So if you are part of a large company facing increasing pressure, you have a real problem on your hands because you, by and large, don't have a passionate workforce. You will not be able to respond to the performance challenges. You certainly will not be able to get to that increasing returns around performance improvement. So with that, let me declare victory and open it up for conversation.
Yes. I was sitting over at Mountain View Library waiting for this to start.